let me introduce Brendan. I actually was pushing that he's coming. He just arrived from Hong Kong because I think he's one of the most fascinating persons I've ever met, and for sure the most fascinating person in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space. Just to give you some facts about EOS, the token Brendan created, they started the token sale in June last year, and it's an ongoing sale till June this year. So far, they raised $2 billion within 6 months. They created a currency, EOS, which has today a market cap of 13 billion. It's among the top 5, top 10 cryptocurrencies in the world, out of nothing. And at the end of the token sale in June, most probably Block One, who's the company behind EOS, the creator, will have like 6 to 8 billion US dollar raised by the token sale. And I know you had this cryptocurrency panel, but my experience is always when I ask people in the space about very basic question, what is blockchain and what is your take on it, I get a different answer. So although it's a very generic question, I thought we start with that. So what's your take on blockchain?
Yeah, real quickly, thanks for the introduction. My name is Brendan Blumer. I'm the CEO of a company called Block One, and we are the publisher of a project called EOS. Thanks for the kind introduction. A little bit of a clarification. So we've been selling tokens since June. Up till date, we've sold about $1.5 billion worth of tokens. Just want to clarify for the record. But to jump in, what is blockchain? So the way that I look at blockchain is really just the next iteration of the internet. So if you think of back 20 years ago when we started really getting into the internet, it was mass scalable data transfer. And what we found over the last couple of decades is that it was insecure data transfer. We've constantly had problems with people hacking or intercepting data. We haven't been able to fix the double spending problem. So ultimately, the entire internet world has been architected with a lot of middlemen. You still, when you want to transfer value in the old world, you're still having multiple intermediaries. So if I wanted to digitally transfer value, we'd be looking at something like a government that had an issued currency involved. We'd be looking at a money transmitter, someone like PayPal, who would also be involved. So that's two counterparties in order for me to transfer digital value from point A to point B. The way that I see the blockchain is just mass scalable, secure data transfer, really. It's just that secure word. And as we continue to go forward, we're going to see so much more than money and value being transferred. We're going to see every piece of content put on the blockchain because we know that it can't be hacked, because we know that it actually went onto the internet at that moment in time. Every timestamp will be on the blockchain so that we know that it actually happened at that time. It wasn't changed later. So really, the way that I boil down the blockchain, as we are able to create more scalable solutions and more data can fit on to the blockchain, what you're really looking is the next iteration of the internet, a secure version of the internet.
Okay, taken. And how does then EOS, so why does the world need a new token all the time?
Right.
And how does the EOS token fit in your take on blockchain?
So there's a couple questions here. So why does why do we need more than one token? Really, tokens are just a unit of account. So when we say what is a token, is it a security? Is it a commodity? Is it nothing? At the end of the day, the blockchain or a token is just an Excel spreadsheet, right? So the reality is it's anything. Right? Every token is inherently very different. And yes, we don't need one new money, right? All these tokens are not just competitors to Bitcoin, right? They're a unit of account for these communities, which are decentralized organizations. Now, going back to Bitcoin, or sorry, EOS. So right now there's a big gap between what existing platforms can do and what we know the space is capable of. So you guys have probably heard, how many people have heard of Bitcoin, Ethereum, these projects out there? So most everyone at this point. Well, what we're really dealing with is, yes, we had the advent of being able to do peer-to-peer value transfer, but they're very slow, and they're very expensive, and they're very limited. If you take a look at Bitcoin, it can only process about 3 transactions per second. Ethereum's up there with 10, 13 transactions per second. And when you look at the mining costs associated with proof of work, we're really looking at something like 50 to 100 US dollars per transaction, right? That we actually pay miners through token inflation before fees, right? So then there's fees on top of that. Now, when you're looking at something so slow and expensive, it doesn't really have a wide range of use. It works for like a gold settlement-like function. So if we're just transferring large amounts of value around seldomly, right, we can use the blockchain in that instance. But when it comes to time-stamping things, putting content on the blockchain, putting likes on the blockchain, social media, it's not applicable, right? We can't use those platforms. So what EOS is it's a delegated proof of stake blockchain network that massively increases the throughput that we're able to push through on the blockchain. So we're talking about scaling up to millions of transactions per second at nominal costs. And that very much broadens the use case of the blockchain. One example of this type of technology is a social media platform called Steemit. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. But Steemit is the most used blockchain in the world, and it is a social media platform that was designed, implemented, launched, and had 150,000 users a day in less than 6 months. And imagine a Facebook-like network where every time you're submitting content based on the number of people that like it, right, you're actually getting paid a token, right? And advertisers on that platform need to buy that token in order to advertise with the platform. So it removes the shareholders from the ecosystem and closes the value loop to the actual people that are creating the value, right? The content producers themselves. And so EOS is a platform that allows people to build projects like Steemit.com, things that have millions of transactions, potentially millions of transactions per second in requirement, right? If you tried to take a Steemit-like platform and put it on something that was on proof of work, whether it's Ethereum or Bitcoin, one, it wouldn't even be possible, but two, just the likes alone associated with the social media network would cost billions of dollars a year on a platform like Ethereum in order to actually put it on the blockchain because it's so labor intensive.
What do you think then? I know it's a sort of competition, but I guess that a lot of people here are trading in cryptocurrencies. So do you think that Bitcoin and Ethereum will exist in 10 years? Yeah, or because if they don't have a use case, or if it's very hard to build a use case on it, yeah.
So
what's the inherent value?
It's very hard to predict how organizations or networks will continue to evolve and respond to market situations. What I am pretty sure of, and I think that the industry is realizing more and more every day, is that we're going through a process of shifting through this proof of work mechanism, which is extremely intensive, resource intensive, and very costly, to more of a proof of stake or a delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism. And so I think that shift will happen. Now, these existing platforms, Bitcoin, Ethereum, they couldn't go through that metamorphosis, if you will, without essentially a complete ecosystem restart. There would be no backwards compatibility for developers. It would be a big adjustment, but it's hard for me to comment on the decisions they'll make and how quickly they will adapt. But what we are seeing is that most of the new momentum is with these new networks that are able to deliver much higher performance at a fraction of the cost and much faster transaction times. If you take a look again back at these proof of work systems, most of them have somewhere between 10 minutes to 2 hours in order for a transaction to reach 100% finality, meaning it can't be reversed, right? Well, can you imagine putting something like a like on a blockchain when you liked a post and needing to wait 10 minutes before it gave you feedback? Again, that drastically limits the use cases for developers in terms of building consumer applications when things require so much time to reach finality. So a project like EOS is able to reach finality in less than a second with sub-second block times, 500 milliseconds. And those are the things that are going to be required in order to develop the next generation of consumer products on the blockchain.
You mentioned Steemit, and you mentioned sort of indirectly Facebook, because if it's a social platform where you can post and get likes, whatever, yeah, but you get incentivized, does that mean Facebook's going to be disrupted and killed? Yeah.
So I'm a big believer that ultimately the blockchain is empowering communities to disrupt the company. All right. And over time, you're going to see these communities really start to pick off the largest tech organizations in the world. And it's going to start with centralized technology platforms, things like Facebook, things like Uber, things where you can essentially open source the code. So if you take a look at something like Facebook, you have a team of developers in a room guarding their code, building this proprietary formula. Well, once you open source it and you bring in a community, you can essentially have potentially 1 billion developers around the world adding value to that project, right? The token holders or the stakeholders are the ones deciding which things get forked in, what kind of privacy do we want to let out in order to bring in more ad revenue that goes to our users, and there becomes checks and balances instead of just one organization making all those decisions on our behalf. So I think that these centralized technology platforms are the first to really get disrupted, and you're already starting to see it. The only thing that's been stopping it up until this point has been that the lack of these platforms, these underlying technologies that enable these developers to go and launch something competitive enough. But we're going to really see that this year. 2017 was really all about Bitcoin. Really all about digital value transfer. And I think that as we go forward this year and next year, the conversation is going to shift to these decentralized autonomous communities, or DACs. So yes, I do think that most of these will all start to get disrupted very soon. Projects like, companies like Apple and more centralized research centers that are developing hardware and stuff, you're going to start to see the governance of those organizations get disrupted over a long period of time, but it's not going to be imminent. It's going to be the large tech platforms that really where the users are generating their value, and their primary value proposition is the network effects that they hold.
What do you think is the time frame for that? Are we talking about 10 years, 1 year, 3 years?
So I think that this technology is going to follow a very similar path to the internet. So it's going to. There was a very good article with the Harvard Business Review. It says blockchain is not a disruptive technology, meaning it's not going to come in and displace everything fast. But it is a fundamental technology in the sense that everything needs to be rebuilt. And it's like we've been using straw and hay for decades, and now we have cement. And the first thing we put together, although stronger, right, leaks, and we're getting used to these new materials. And so I think it's going to be over the course of the next couple, 10, 15, 20 years. But it starts now, and it's going to continue happening every year. So if you're looking at storage or file transfer, these are the first things that are starting to happen. I think you're going to see social media get bigger this year. Steemit is an amazing example to check out. As I mentioned, it's the most used blockchain in the world, and it's growing very organically every day. When you start to introduce a token into these networks and all of your users are exposed to this token, it means everyone has complete aligned interests, and everyone's exposed to the health of the organization. So there's a viral component, right, that even displaces the most viral things we've seen to date, because it brings all your users into the growth of the organization, and they become directly invested in making it succeed.
Just as a side note, I think I get it right that your partner Dan Larimer, also who is co-started
correct.
EOS, also co-started Steemit. So
yeah, so our CTO has been involved in building or invented the delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism. Has been involved at projects, even with Bitcoin at very early on, and has created the most used blockchains in the world. Steemit is one of those examples. So
that's all great and fantastic, and I think that's a good outlook for 2018. The darker side, or the more negative or insecurity for 2018, is the looming regulation. So on the one side, there is no day where we don't get great news like what can be done with blockchain. On the other side, there is almost no day where not one regulator in the world, like I think last Friday it was our German Minister of Finance, who I think has other things to do, but he wanted to talk about blockchain as well and said this must be regulated somehow. Yeah, the French wants to do it. Yeah, Koreans are thinking about it, the Americans. So where do you think is the world going in terms of regulation?
It's a good question. First off, I think that regulation just represents the the industry maturing. Like I said, we're very similar back to the mid-90s with the internet, and people are trying to figure out what this technology is and what it means. And we're very supportive of regulation that doesn't impede innovation. And I think for the most part, most governments are pretty sensitive in it. We live in a pretty competitive world, and no government is looking to push all the innovation offshore. We went through the internet cycle, so they saw it firsthand. They saw how that developed. And I think that most regulators are being pretty careful. Some countries specifically in Asia, are taking a more, okay, stop everything until we understand it, and then we'll reintroduce it in a way that we're comfortable with. But I think, that, again, even this is the minority of regulatory bodies. I expect them to continue to understand the technology, and I expect them to continue to put things forth that should protect consumers, but not impede innovation too much. Ultimately, I'm pretty optimistic on how regulation unfolds going forth.
Maybe because what I love at DLD, it's your first time, is like it's not just tech people, but like creative people, philosophers, and the whole blockchain movement has also a very sort of deeper philosophical layer. Because if I look, for example, if you take governments or sovereign states, from my point of view, what is their main duties? So they secure borders, as long as we have sovereign states, so practically security towards the outside or from the outside, and then they secure sort of law and order internally with the police, and they have a monetary system. So a little bit cynically said, if you follow our chancellor, she said like last year that borders cannot be fully secured, so you put that away, so sort of they're not good in that anymore. Police, I think they're still very good in, at least in the Western world. But if you take away monetary systems, so how do countries and sovereign states maybe look in 20 years because of blockchain? It's a very broad question, but maybe just
absolutely.
As an ending.
It's a great question, and at the end of the day, every blockchain is a governance system. What a blockchain is about how a large group of people reach consensus or decide something versus having an elected official decide everything for us and having everyone trust that. A blockchain government is the future of government. Now, how that, I think every government will utilize these technologies in various different ways. I do not think that in the short term, these blockchain-based cryptocurrencies, actually, I don't really like the word cryptocurrency because it starts to imply that all these things are currencies, which they absolutely aren't, right? They're units of accounts that are used in so many different ways. So I think that you're going to see them coexist with government fiat currencies, and I think you're going to see government fiat currencies move themselves onto the blockchain to take a lot of those advantages. What I do think that the blockchain will do to existing government currency systems is it will be a negotiating tool for governments to find middle ground with the masses of their countries in terms of how they run their monetary policy. As people start to understand these technologies better and they start to get used to certain degrees of transparency and assurances, they're going to start to demand more from their governments in terms of the way money is printed, the way money is spent, and the transparency associated with each of those steps along the way.
I would say I don't know the time. We could have one or two questions if you want. No, long questions? Okay. Then, Brendan, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.